So recording. So Bethany, thank you so much for agreeing last minute to have a chat with me via Zoom. I think perhaps we'll start with you introducing yourself, because we've been following each other on Twitter for a long time, but I actually haven't heard your story, so I'd actually really love to hear it.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks for inviting me to chat today. I'm really pleased to talk to you. So my name's Bethany. I'm from Canberra. I'm a single mum, 2 kids. And my story is that I've always had a really strong interest in politics. As I studied at university, but I think my interest came from more of a accountability and transparency perspective in government, more than I've never been affiliated with a political party or interested in political parties at all. And so I've had this natural interest my whole life. And as the years have gone on, I've become more and more vocal, which my friends on Facebook can attest to, about political issues. Probably the big ones are things like domestic violence and femicide and Indigenous issues, and more recently too, federal ICAC. So, but I had, a few years ago, I had this aha moment, and it was when I was watching Sarah Hanson-Young being slut-shamed in the Senate by David Leyenhelm, and I was enraged. I was so angry, and I thought, we need more women in that place. We need so many more women, because if there were more women, this crap wouldn't be happening. So it took me a while to, it took me a while to get the confidence to think that someone like me could do this, because as I mentioned to you in an email, I'm not connected. I didn't go to private schools. I grew up in a country town of Victoria until I was 13, and then on the south coast of New South Wales. So I've always lived in country areas, and for me, on a personal level, I've never felt like I could be anybody. But then as I've gotten older, it's kind of like, well, why not? Yeah. You know, why do politicians have to be well connected? Why do they have to have gone to private schools? Why do they have to have be what I see as the elite? And we've seen a few people come in, like Jackie Lambie and Pauline Hanson, and people like that, where they're just the average Australian. And whilst they might not always represent my views, especially one in particular, what I think and what I see is that I think Australians want a more authentic politician. They want people to speak for them, but not, you know, and represent their interests, not the personal interests of the politicians. So as that journey for me has gone on for a while, where I've had to build up the confidence in myself to think that somebody like me could ever dare to dream that people might be interested in voting for me. But one characteristic I've got is I'm really persistent, and I'm really tenacious. So I don't take no for an answer. I don't care who you are or how famous or connected you are. I'll hassle you. I'll talk to you. I will. I just use my voice, and that's all I've got. So I've been doing that. It was just over 12 months ago that I thought maybe I should run for government. Now, I have to give credit to one of my best friends, who, her and her sister had this very fleeting desire to start a political party. Mm-hmm. And I said, we want you to be in it, Beth. And I said, oh, don't be ridiculous, you know, because I swear, and I'm mischievous, and I'm not... I'm a bit naughty, you know. Like I'm an Aussie. I'm a typical Aussie, you know. I don't break any laws, but I don't take myself seriously, and I like to laugh at a good dirty joke. So I just didn't think someone like me would have the goods to do that. And I thought, why the hell not me? Exactly. And so one of my new Twitter friends, Linda Howard, she sent this message, and I've said this somewhere else, that it was a quote by Lily Tomlin, and it says, I wish somebody would do something about that. And then I realised that I am somebody. And that's when I thought, yeah, well, it was before then, but that quote has really stuck with me, that I think, yeah, we all are somebody. You don't have to be someone of note, or you don't have to have the best CV in the world. You just have to want to do it and be passionate about it. So, yeah, I finally started backing myself now, and I'm going to go for it.
And so you've made a decision which party you're going to run for 2022?
Absolutely. So I made a decision very early on. I'd never joined, well, I shouldn't say never, but I don't want to join the Liberal or the Labor Party, because I believe that the rules of the party, like having to toe the party line and the ideologies, I think they hold them back. And so, and I find that now they're more about just being in power and achieving power than they are for doing the right thing by the country. And so, yeah. So it was through a friend of mine, Anthony Pesic, who ran as an independent in Canberra last year. I volunteered for his campaign, and he introduced me to Robert Knight, who's the president of the Australian Progressives. So we chatted, and I don't know if Rob will remember this, but I basically said, like I said before, I swear I'm very opinionated. I don't want to refine who I am. I don't want to censor what I say. I want to be me, and if I can do that with your party, I'd love to join. So so I joined, and it's been that way since. So I'm a member of the Australian Progressives and a member of the Canberra Progressives, and I've nominated myself to be a candidate in the October election. I haven't been picked yet, but
I'm your story is very inspiring. I will be following it very closely. Good on you for backing yourself, because it's interesting being a female that we hold ourselves back at things that I think a lot of men wouldn't even think about doing. And I had this conversation with my sister, actually. She and I are very close in age, we're about 16 months apart, often get called twins. And she ended up doing dentistry, and she's got a very different career path, obviously, to myself. But we were talking about this, that there's a process of having to back ourselves. And she always felt through uni, and then because one of the things, because she's obviously young, and she was a dentist straight out of high school, like uni, the high school. And she often, whenever she says she's a dentist, you see, and I get it when people speak to me, the flicker of the face of like, are you sure you don't mean dental nurse? Like, that's a thing that like annoy us, and it just sends me right. And she's gotten used to it. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. Because the immediate thinking is, surely a woman, and that's still around, and that's crazy. But she always felt that she had to work 10 times harder than any of her male peers, and just to be able to be at the top of the game, she had to do. And she said, why is it that women? She goes, I probably didn't, but internally feel like I have so much more things that I've got to mentally get through to mentally back myself. So I think that there's a lot of I'm actually really proud of you to have gotten through that. And it's massive barriers, which I want to talk about a little bit later, as to, I think there are reasons why there aren't as many women, not so much that first challenge of feeling confident enough to even go and, throw yourself up for public assassination in a character way. But but there's some real practical things which I want to discuss with you a bit later. But tell me, so, I mean, obviously there are a lot of micro parties around. I hopefully will be speaking to Robert later on about his party, and same with Victor Klein from the New Liberals. There's a Sustainable Australia party. There's quite a few small parties, and then there's obviously the independent question, which I'll discuss with you later as well. A lot of these smaller parties are advocating for political donation reform and for a federal ICAC that has the powers to prosecute and actually hold federal politicians account for corruption or from things that don't pass the pub test from an Australian perspective. What was there anything that was a distinguishing factor that made you decide it is the Progressives, it's not another one, or I shouldn't hold back and just wait and see how it forms?
No, I think it was the right place at the right time for me. Like, I've known about other minor parties. I definitely know that this one meets my values very, very closely. And Rob is a really, really good leader. It's not a hierarchical party. We all have an equal say. And I really value that. I value the diversity in our party. And as people learn about us, they're joining us. They're becoming involved, because we all support each other, and we want to build trust in each other. So that, because if we can't trust each other, how can we expect voters to trust us? So I love the Progressives, and I'm really proud to be part of it. But my dream would be, if all the minor parties that have the same values and want the same thing just bloody join together. And I know why they don't.
I know too.
I know that there's
Feels
a lot of identity, there's a lot of blood, sweat and tears. There's a lot of work going into setting up these parties, there truly is. And then there's their dedication to their members, because to change anything, you have to go out to your members, and that's completely reasonable. But imagine the power and the strength that we would have. Sorry, I had a cough.
It's all right, I was doing it all in my last video as well.
Oh, imagine the strength we would have if we all united and created an alliance, all the people who share the same values, that if we join together under whatever banner, for me, it's not necessarily, I shouldn't say this, but it's not necessarily the brand for me. It's what I want to achieve, and it's what I want to collectively achieve, because politics has become too much about egos. And what we need to move away from is making it about ourselves as individuals and think of the greater good. And I know that sounds trite, but we do. We have to stop saying, well, I want to lead, or I want to be this. We've got to look at what we want to achieve. So we want to achieve transparency, accountability in government. We want to stop corruption. So we need a federal ICAC. We want to increase First Nations representation in government and increase it, advocate for them. We need to do something about climate change. Like, there's a million things we need to do. We have to do, and they're not lefty ideals. And this is where I get frustrated with this political divide, because I see this divide as being a construct of government, of the left and of a particular ideology. Because if we're fighting amongst ourselves, we're not focusing on what the source of the problem is, which is government, because it's the government that sets the culture for that country. And so Australia's always been such an egalitarian country. We don't have the class system. We didn't, and we're all about the Aussies. And I feel like it's now becoming it's become a fight between this perception of, the left of being lefty, left Nazis, we're doing this and we're doing that. I think that the left now it used to be the centre, but I think the right has gotten so far right that anything behind it looks left. So what I would love to achieve is fight for the centre of Australia, which I think is where the majority of voters sit, and fight for the things that we need as a country. So sorry to ramble, if we all got together, if we all united and everyone backed us, and if people could trust us, we could actually do something about the things that we all complain about.
I agree.
That was a big rant to get to that point.
No, but it's a really important point, because I think there are a lot of Australians that look at, I think, and this is really a big part of why I wanted to do this sort of series, is we know we leave it up, and a lot of people leave it up until election time and are deeply frustrated by the ping pong between the two majors. I'm excluding the rusted on, because they're not having this conversation, right? They're not questioning their vote. I'm talking about anyone that is feeling increasingly frustrated by what it means to be represented by the two major parties and the function or dysfunction, so to speak, from that. The amount of conversations I've had with people that have said or put independence as the crazies. So I think what they mean by that is like a cata sort of, like that. Yeah, I get that. But that's usually because they haven't had a deeper enough exploration into who are those on that massive big ballot sheet. Who are these other people and what do they stand for? And part of that is because these smaller parties don't have the funds to get in your face and to compete at the same level. And so it requires an individual taking it upon themselves to do the research. And, I do hold the belief that most Australians want to rock up on election day and vote for someone that's not going to fuck them over. Like,
that's exactly what they want to do. Yeah.
Right?
Or they vote for who they hate the least.
Yeah, but they want to be able to come to an election and vote, okay, I don't feel like I'm going to be screwed over by this party. I'm not going to have to get enraged and have Facebook rants. I'm confident that this party are full of good people that are going to try to get on with the job, so I don't have to get involved. Because you know what? I've got my life. I'm trying to raise my family, or I'm trying to, live my life. I don't want to have to be continually worried that, the future prosperity of this country is at risk because these idiots can't figure it out and are so focused on self-interest. And that's been my inherent issue with direct democracy as an idea. Is direct democracy would assume that most people want to get engaged on a day-to-day level on issue to issue. And I don't believe that's the truth. I think there's a very small percentage of people that want to. And even then, they'd only want to be involved in a very small amount of issues as opposed to the broader.
They just want us to get on and do the bloody job, and they don't want to have to worry about it. But the thing, this makes me lead to another point that I'm really concerned about in Australia, which is the dominance of right-wing media, i.e. Murdoch, in Australia, and the control, the axis of evil that there is with the government, the mining companies and Murdoch. They all prop up each other, and they've got unlimited funds, so they control the media. They control the information that people get. Australians are being dumbed down, because the dumber we are, the more likely we are to vote right. And so they're making sure that the narrative that Australians are receiving are that the Greenies and the arsonists start the fires, and that, you know, the left want to tell us, the progressives want to tell us where to live and how to live and that sort of thing, which is completely untrue. And that really, it makes me really angry. And again, going back to that point where creating that divide where we're fighting each other, like there's always been this divide between the city and the country, but the country think we don't care, but we actually do. I think we all care about our farmers, we care about our agricultural land, we care about our, the industries in these regional areas. And but what frustrates me about that is that the very party that is screwing these people and screwing these areas are the ones that are propping up, you know, that they're propping up this false narrative about that, you know, that the left are going to ruin your life. And it's so untrue. And so we've got to, there's so many complexities about the Australian political system, the media, and the donations from big mining companies, etc. It's so complex that we have to deconstruct that, the influence that these organisations have on Australian politics. We've got to strip it back, and the only way we can do that is to take a broom through it, investigate what's happened in the past. I'm sorry to say, prosecute any illegal activity, and then create new legislation that makes it illegal for certain things to happen, and hold government and our parliamentarians more accountable, so that they have to do the right things by the people, not by their political party to get elected again. Because it is about Australians. And this is what politicians forget. The Australian taxpayers are the masters. The government are the servants. The government work for the people, and they forget that. And we've got to look after the people first. And that's what I guess if you want to say that's an ideology, that's what mine is. It's about looking after all Australians, not just ones on the left or the centre or the right, or whether you're white Australian or First Nations. We've got to look after everybody equally. And that means, and what equality will mean, that some people will lose some of their privilege in order to give somebody else their privilege that they've never had. And that's going to be a really tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. And having that viewpoint is going to send out a lot of attack dogs if people like me are ever able to get into government. That, you know, you watch the right come in swinging. But this is what I think, well, okay, bring it on, because this is what I want to, this is the Australia I want, and I want to have one that I can grow up and be proud of, and I'll fight for it.
There's so much to unpack in that, and I want to do that. Like so one of the points, say media ownership laws, 100%. I think if anyone, independent, minor, or whomever, needs to not just go in and say blanket, we're going to make changes and reforms to media ownership. Come with a specific, say something, 25% across media assets will not be able to be, owned or influenced by an individual and or corporation. Like, go specific so we can understand it. I think free press is something that we haven't had and for quite a long time, and it's integral to the health of our democracy. It's funny, I was just talking to my daughters. I've got two daughters. I've got a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old.
Oh, wow.
They're going through...
my two, by the way.
Oh, really?
Oh, actually, my 11-year-old just turned 12.
Oh, bless.
Yeah.
And do you have girls?
No, I've got a boy and a girl.
You got a boy and a girl. Well, I imagine you then still understand girls at this age are interesting, and we're having a daily challenge. And so I'll always flip it the day that I know they're grumpy in the car, and Mondays are usually the worst, right? And so today it became an economics lecture, and I try not to do it so it's boring. But But I was talking to them about the idea of taxation. If we were to get rid of income tax and increase the GST, what would that mean? And so we were going through it, and they came to the conclusion it was good. I was like, okay, so let's think about what would it be like for people that don't have income, so the elderly or people on disabilities. So they're not going to get any net benefits from that lack of income tax, but it's going to cost a lot more for them to live. What about then? And they're like, oh, that didn't make, I didn't think about that. And so for me, like having these conversations with them, that where I was going to them about it is in year 10, most kids in Australia are having to make a decision to choose economics or history or politics and law. All great, choosing politics and law and history, which is what my daughter wants to do. And it's frankly what I did. I didn't do economics. I did it at uni. But what we're missing out on is when we allow the majority of Australians to go to the polls every 4 years without just a basic level of understanding about economic management and economics, even if a party comes and makes a lie or a vote like promise, if you don't understand the impacts of that, and if the oppositions aren't better at persecuting why that's a bad idea because they're so busy explaining and flouting their own ideas, what inevitably happens is we have a really significant sort of craziness of misinformation, and that's where disengagement happens. And I believe education, just the basic education of basic economics, of you know, even financial literacy in terms of creating your own budget, but equally of understanding from a media perspective where lies are, where to see manipulation, what questions to ask, what powers do you have in our political system to know what's legal and what isn't legal. Just the basics, because this will enable Australians to better sense check or fact check.
Exactly.
And that has been, I mean, we see, if we want to continue not making that a priority, let's look at America as to what's going on when they are now actively voting against their own self-interest because the detachment of what someone says or promises versus the actual tangible decisions that need to happen and how that impacts us are so stretched apart. And it's been largely, I believe, contributed because of the lack of education on these matters. Australia's not there, but we have an opportunity now to correct that and to enable, so, you know, the paradigm between left and right. My argument is where that political paradigm is in a 2D when it should be in a 3D. So I look at forward. So you could be left or right of a scale, but what's the forward moving vector? And I hate the left and right. There are certain things that people put me as right thinking. I don't like universal basic income. I'm open-minded if someone's got a better argument, but I don't like from what I learned and understand about economics, and it's also about humanity and psychology. I'm comfortable to say that that's not necessarily going to be a positive for us. But at the same time,
I agree with that too. I don't know much about it, but I'm not a huge fan of what I know.
And yet, you know, there's certain positions I have in terms of how we look at the environment that would place me very solidly in a left. So I think most people are a paradox of that scale, and therefore that scale can no longer really reflect an accurate picture of who we are. And I think we do need to start to think, well, what parties or politicians are talking about the future beyond a 4-year election cycle.
Exactly. Look, China are really amazing at their Belt and Road Initiative. They look out for decades. And
they don't have pesky democracy, you see.
Yeah, well, that's true. That is true. Damn democracy. But in the sense that we don't look beyond the next election cycle, because politicians just want to get re-elected so they stay in power, and so they don't want to do anything that jeopardizes their chance to get re-elected. So we need to start focusing on what's the plan in 10 years, what's the plan in 20 years. That's where we're going to look, and that's how a lot of my thinking sort of, as I've said to you, I'm not an academic and I'm not an expert in anything. Everything is just my own thoughts. I do a lot of reading and I watch a lot of stuff, but I'm really worried about Australia's future, as we all should be. Obviously, climate change is the biggest elephant in the room, which, well, it's not really even an elephant. We all acknowledge it now, most of us. But we need to do, what I'm worried about in our future is if we're going to get more bushfires, more droughts, it's going to impact on our ability to produce our own food. And one thing I am concerned about, so China is buying land in other countries, agricultural land, because it's thinking about its future for when its population gets really big and it can't feed itself with its own land. It's got to get produce and food from elsewhere. And the Australian government is just selling it up. It's like, you know, a big fire sale, and selling water. And that's food production companies like Bellamy's. And this is, it might be great for business now, having this foreign investment, but what I'm concerned about is our future food security. For when we look down the track, are we going to be able to sustainably feed our people when our population's grown, when we can't produce as much food, we don't have as much water, and the Chinese ownership is just going to send all that food back to China? And good on them. How smart are they? You know, that's kind of how I think. But I'm incredibly angry at the Australian government for allowing this to happen. It's got to stop. We've got to think about what do we need to do to protect and make sure we can feed and water and have our kids have a healthy life into the future. We've got to look at those things.
And this is the problem, because it is quite a complex issue. So I don't believe it is as simple as, and this is the nuances, right? Because you have to say it in a simple enough way so that the conversation isn't 10 hours. But at the same time, there's dangers of that simplification. So I don't think it's a government minister that's just saying, yep, sell it all. I think it's structurally, whether it's at a state level or there isn't the right checks and balances there.
Well, isn't that what the Foreign Investment Review Board's meant to do, is approve sales to foreign companies?
So if they're not doing it, then it's that board that's not doing it. And so the problem I go back to it, we're not able to go online and print a report that shows us the amount of foreign investment or sale to China in the, like year by year, and show us a quick map of what's being owned by China and the economic consequence of that. That's the kind of detail that we don't have, and because of that, it's easy to say it's the government's fault. But then, by virtue, the government can obfuscate and say, "Well, it's not," and they are right as well. And because of that, what we have to start doing is start saying, "Well, we're not happy with the idea that other countries are able to own our assets. We want to own our own assets, and we want to make sure that the legislation or checks and balances that are there so that we don't lose control of that as a strategic direction." That is I don't know many people that would disagree with that sentiment. But what happens is it becomes politicized and simplified.
And then people make it about race and xenophobia, which is really disappointing, because, you know, I get accused of being racist and xenophobic a few times on Twitter. And anyone who knows me knows that that's the last thing I am. But I'm just a really, really concerned Australian, and I think we need to think strategically, and that we don't. I mean, I think that the government is the ultimate throat to choke on issues like this. Whilst they might not be directly making those decisions, they certainly control making the legislation that makes these decisions, and they know what's going on. And we've seen in the past, when a government generally is not happy with something, it can, in many cases, have the ability to change legislation to stop it from happening. Like we saw with early on in coronavirus, they stepped in to stop a lot of our face masks or ethanol being exported overseas when we needed it here. So they were able to step in and fix things. But like you said, there's a lot of layers of complexity. And when I speak at a very high level. I speak from my observations and what I've read. And my view is that, when people say, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, I say, well, because I don't have access to all the information that I'd need to be able to make an informed decision on it, I can't really say how I'd do it. But what I'd like to do is, if I ever got into government, is get a team of the best people around me, the experts, the academics, the scientists. The lawyers, I would get them all around me to help inform good policy in this area. Instead of making policy based on politics or ideology, I'd make it based on facts and evidence. And that's how I would go about it.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't want to get too sidetracked on that, but the point, like, I do believe government has that. I mean, so especially on a state level, I know that in WA we have that, and I think those structures exist in federal government. I'm certain of it. I'm listening to Turnbull's audiobook just like at the moment, it's 30 hours or whatever. I'm most of the way through it.
I'm listening
to say he was doing that, right? Like, he got the smartest of minds together. Then the complexity is, though, if they don't have control in both the upper and the lower, they've got to negotiate it with the various interests, and that's a really important part of democracy. So then it gets watered down a little bit, but that's often the
But wasn't that issue Malcolm Turnbull's issue? It was more the factions within his own party rather than having the issues.
That was my point, is that the systems, I think, are there. There are some things that are really undermining it, and that is media ownership. It is definitely money in politics and vested interest, and how lobbyists have power, because it costs money to run a political party. It costs a lot of money to get elected.
Oh my God, yes.
Yep. You know, and that money comes from somewhere. So if we accept that the Labor the unions use their money from their members largely to fund it, if anything, the Labor Party structure is closest thing to crowdfunding that you could get, right?
Yeah.
We all have to acknowledge that it isn't as simple, and as there is definitely power struggles and I don't want to call it corruption, but people put it in that basket of some grey areas that people aren't super happy with. And then obviously with the Liberal Party, that's even less checked and balanced, because you know, by virtue it's businesses that fund that, because that's the true ideology of the party is the people versus business. But the core reason why the system, because I think the majority of the system works, and the majority of the government, the way it's designed, works well, but we've allowed it to erode because we haven't had an accountability like the ICAC. We have let media ownership laws deteriorate to the point that there's too much influence. There isn't a high enough standard in reporting, and that's largely to do with, I believe, the way that the media industry has adapted to social media and the internet, because fast news and speed is the thing that they're using to survive. In investigative journalism is expensive and long, and
but also the government coming after them because of, you know, look at the Witness K and that sort of thing, or Annika Smethurst. Like when the media reports on something that is in the public interest, the government are basically going after them, and we're the most. I think we're really slipped. I don't know the figures, but we're really slipped as far as secrecy in government. Yeah. And that's really, really concerning to me, because I know it's really easy for people to throw around words like fascism or dictatorship or autocracy or things like that. But I think the concern I have is that, like the frog boiling in the water, where Australians are becoming accustomed to just slowly, just our rights and freedoms just slowly being chipped away at. And
it's have a Bill of Rights.
No, we don't even have a Bill of Rights. Exactly. But I want to go back to something you said before about the system allows this to happen, and sort of Labor and Liberal, whilst they've got, you know, they've got different ideologies, they're very similar in the sense that they've got to placate their factions, and they've got to make everyone happy. But they also they get a lot of political donations, and this is another big issue we have to address in the political system in Australia. The reason why it's so hard to get into politics is because it's so damn expensive. To run a campaign and do all of that work, it costs, you know, tens of thousands of dollars for the major parties. They spend a fortune on it. And so they receive political donations, and some that are unknown or not declared till a year later, or we don't find out about them, but they're getting them from vested interests, and those vested interests then have a say. They do. There's denying that they have an influence on our policy. Just look at the mining companies and the influence they have in Morrison government. And so one start to that is getting rid of political donations. And I know this might not be palatable to the average taxpayer, but I think that campaigns should be funded by taxpayers. I think that there maybe be other benchmarks that have to be reached for a political party to be able to get in the ring and get that taxpayers' money to fund their election. But we're finding that with the progressives, because we don't take corporate donations, and we may have to slightly relax that rule. It's not like they're beating down our door, but to allow ethical donations. So, for example, if we've already established our policy and say a renewable energy company, for example, wanted to give us some money, we wouldn't say that renewable energy company was influencing our policy if it's already been made.
But, you know, any skeptic would say, if you don't have, you know, it's not that you shouldn't do that, because if you don't, for the sake of being a purist, let's say,
and this
you're
is
never going to compete and get rid of the people in power. So
this
there's
is the problem.
It's a very difficult line and boundary to run.
Yeah.
Because if you are a purist, you're not going to largely get elected. But
exactly.
if you don't have the right structural or constitutional safeguards to almost put a Chinese wall between policy development and donations, and internally have the written ability to, if the party or someone in the party is seen to have influence a policy outcome by virtue of their relationship, well, then that is going to be publicly declared and we have no tolerance for it. And I think if internally parties hold themselves to a much higher level of standards and make that the standard and make it real-time donation disclosure regardless, and have greater commitment to accountability and transparency, which is ingrained in the constitution of that party, then you don't have to worry so much about that argument, because you could easily say to anyone, oh, but, you know, that party that renewable energy company can come and influence them at a later date, which is true, unless you can respond to that and say, no, actually, because our constitution has this, these are all the ways that that's not going to be the same, at least better than the existing system.
Well, that's what we're doing with the constitution of the Australian Progressives. I mean, we basically say that if a corporation were to donate, we'd have to take it to the executive. That we'd have to do research into the company. It'd have to be fully disclosed in real time. So that would be if. But and we've also in our constitution got a list of the types of companies we would never accept donations from. So tobacco companies, mining companies, gambling, that sort of thing. So things that align with our values.
I just make a point about mining companies, because it's come a few times. So full disclosure, my family I'm married into a mining family.
All right.
And I work for mining companies. I work in sustainability in that area.
Okay.
And mining companies employ a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
And they also get the resources out of the ground that we would need to even survive. So I just wanted to put a caveat there.
Yeah, we'll put a caveat on it, definitely. So I apologise for that, because I do not want to see a blanket stop of all mining companies. So I say it as a generalisation, and I apologise, because it should be Adani's, Gina Rinehart's, you know, things like that, Clive Palmer, where you know, those types of where they're giving money to the government. You've got people from the Minerals Council working in Scott Morrison's office. It's a revolving.
I wholeheartedly agree.
That type of mine, and I know that a lot of mining companies do create a lot of jobs. So my apologies for not making that distinction, because in my head, that when I refer to it, I should put a hashtag, not all mining companies.
Well, listen, the reality is they collectively have to deal with that reputation. There's no point pissing and moaning about it. Like, it's the same as if you're in opposition and you lose. There's only so much pissing and moaning you have to do before you reflect on yourself and say, I didn't have a better counter argument. And I think for the mining industry, there's no doubt that they're going to have to get better at articulating their role in this, in our community, outside of what we've largely known them to do. And there's been atrocious things that have occurred.
So bad. Yeah, sorry.
This is a nuance, especially here in Western Australia and in Queensland, that is often forgotten about. Because there are a lot of people that are employed by mining companies, and there are, I would say, the vast majority that are just, they're great Australian companies. But what we have to do is make sure that the behaviours, the conduct, the influence on Parliament is checked and is transparent, because if they expect to have a better industry reputation, then they also are going to have to hold themselves to a better standard. And
well, just as evidence with Rio Tinto more recently blowing up that mine, and with the sacred site, and you know, that's just one example, I'm sure, of many. And the thing is, and it's hard because I live in Canberra, so all my views are perception and what I read, and you live the experience and you know what's going on. And so there's that finding that balance where we say, well, this is the perception, this is the reality, how do we bring it somewhere to the middle where it's the truth? And make
conversations like this, and being open-minded, and being, as I said, I certainly didn't expect you to apologize, but it's important that if anyone's watching, that they better understood what you meant by that.
Thanks.
I knew by instinct who you meant when you were saying mining companies, but I certainly didn't want other people to immediately strike you off as being, you know, and this is the challenge, because we're such busy human beings. We're if you have kids, whether you have kids or not, life is incredibly busy, and the ability to dive deep is harder. It's a luxury, to be honest. As a consequence, we've become really used to just hearing one thing that we don't want to hear and writing them off, and that's wrong. And we need to start to really change the way that we communicate, we conduct ourselves. These kind of conversations, I think, are critical, and the ones that we're going to be having.
Well, we do have to be clearer, because one thing, like, while I want to phase out coal, I don't want coal in Australia. Well, again, I have to caveat that with I need to get into government, know more about it, and then make an informed decision. But my perception of it is that I'd like to phase out coal and transition over to renewables. But what my big concern is that I don't want any rural regional community being disadvantaged in any way. So what I would love to see is, before we phase out coal, we find other industries that we can introduce into these regional areas that employ people and keep their communities robust and you know, growing. I don't want to take away from those regional communities at all, and I really care about regional areas, having grown up in them. So when I say I do want to phase out coal, I absolutely do, for the environment, but it's not binary. It's not, you know, you phase out coal, well, that's it, we're going to leave them to rot. We need to introduce things in industry and infrastructure and things like that into regional areas, so that they continue to thrive. And that's what I'd really like to see.
And that's and having you say that and run as a candidate for 2022, I think is really important, because I do feel there's a lot of Australians that are desperate to hear that common sense. Like, to acknowledge this, it's common sense. We're not going to just get rid of coal for two major reasons. One, we actually can't, from an energy, unless everyone wants to want to be in the dark and have no internet. Like, straight up, we don't have the technology to be able to do that switch right now, but it's coming. And if we invest more and more in renewable technology, it's going to happen. But the also important caveat, and it's very often missed in this conversation, is if you have, say, the equivalency in output from a coal power station and a renewable, let's say, solar power station, you ain't going to get the equivalent jobs. That's really important to say. And I learned, and I had that sort of, it wasn't a light bulb, it was like, that was stupid, I didn't think of that before. When I do work in South Africa, and so South Africa, if you can imagine, it's the corruption and put it's on another level. And I couldn't understand. It was a really amazing opportunity to have a desal plant where the place was at. And I asked the local guy, who's sort of like the ministerial, he's the correspondent, so to speak. I said, so why, if the World Bank is going to invest in a big wind farm, why wouldn't you have like a desal plan? It's going to employ people and whatever. And largely it came down to, or his response was the union are very influential and coal employs more. And so it's, so we don't have that, but we do, like, in the sense that we can't just like we're going to replace it with just renewables, because that...
No, but we can do other things. And this goes back to the discussion about China. And this is where I have had people say to me, well, if we reduce our reliance on China and diversify and start bringing some manufacturing back into Australia, you know, and you know, they said, but what are you going to do? And look, I don't have all the answers. And this is why, you know, if you're in politics, you have people around you. But one thing I was just going to say is, what if you could, like, for example, we shut down the car industry in Australia. Imagine if we had transformed that into building electric cars and created an industry there. Like, it's just an idea. I don't even know if it's got legs, but that is just an idea. And imagine if we moved electric car making to some of these areas. That's the, you know, and I'm sure there's other industries that we don't even know about yet that are going to boom in the future. Like, it's about sort of being creative and innovative and thinking forward. And instead of saying, oh no, that's too hard, we can't do that. Let's try. Let's look at what we can do.
And what's holding us back. And I think so. Manufacturing is, I 100% agree with that. I think the fact that we pull raw resources out of the ground, send it to China, and then buy it, it's absurd. But there is a really important reason why we do that, and it's energy. So Australia pays one of the most expensive energy prices in the world. And yet we're one of the biggest exporters of gas. So go figure. So the government are quite happy exporting it and gaining the tax from it, exporting our gas overseas. But we're, you know, as a domestic market, paying a hell of a lot of money from energy. And we're just being stupid about it. If we were able to have a concentrated effort to reduce the cost of energy, manufacturing will become more viable in this country. But you can't prop up an industry or hope for manufacturing if your biggest cost center, because I mean, we have
energy, I know.
Labor's expensive. That's not going to change, and nor should it, because its cost of living is expensive.
But so at least we're paying Australians for things, and at least we keep the economy ticking. Even if we're paying more, maybe Australians will be better. You know, we've got so many people that are just struggling in Australia and not earning enough money to live. Imagine if we had more jobs. Imagine if we could pay them more. People would be able to afford more. And hopefully
a lot of that is energy, right? It's because if we push down the cost of energy, manufacturing becomes a lot more viable. Certain industries, yes, and others less so. But you know, the cost of transport, therefore the cost of food, everything comes down. And our ability to enjoy and have power in terms of our purchasing power and our disposable income goes up. But the reason it exists is largely, frankly, multiple cock-ups on multiple different areas from state to federal level, and no one really wants the hard job of fixing it, because the hard job of fixing it's probably going to take quite a considerable amount of time, and by the time you might be going into the next election without it fixed, and then your opposition is going to crucify you. And this is one of those crucial elements that we have to start talking about realistically. Is the term that we have in Parliament working? Because we're competing against China and Singapore, both of whom don't have pesky democracy, don't have to have but we're competing with them. So what are we going to do with the structure of government today, and how could we maybe change that? And people get scared. Okay, so if it's an 8-term, right, let's assume that. I get terrified at the idea of someone like Abbott being in charge for 8 years. That's terrifying. That. But if we equally introduce reforms, structural reforms that would have, like, let's call them handbrakes, like a handbrake function, that if enough of us were riled up about something, or we had a republic and we had a
participative democracy,
right? Like we can still create different structural changes to protect our worst fears from this tyrannical 8-year government. But we need to have these conversations. We need to get real. And also we need to support the kind of parties that it isn't in their self-interest to maintain the status quo. And I think that's the most critical one.
But see, imagine...
want to keep it as it is.
Imagine for a second there was this concept of this new political party. So I have a dream and I've had it for years. I've had a dream of a third major political party, not minor. And this political party is structured in a way that is more democratic, is more sort of more flat, more people get to have a say. It can be made up of minor parties, made up of independents, but you essentially have one that they subscribe to these certain values, but everyone can advocate for issues that are pertinent in their own electorates, as long as they're not far right or too far left, ones that basically align with the values of the party. And that we had an ongoing, if we were in power, imagine that we could have, with the really big issues, instead of having a referendum, which it's costly and too hard to get up and rarely have a yes, imagine if we could have people, like you said, having more of a say on the big issues that affect them going along. And, you know, imagine if we had a party that wasn't based on ideology, it's based on doing the right thing. And the government mechanism's still there to make sure you've got your opposition party still there to make sure they're doing the right thing, but that this party was better representing the people. See, that's something I can see, and I know there's a lot of little things to be worked out in the foundations, but I see this happening in the future. And just because we've always done things a certain way, it does not mean we need to keep doing them that way. And this is what's really frustrating.
That's insanity to keep doing the same.
It is, exactly. And this is where I get frustrated. Like we were saying earlier, this whole left and right thing is bullshit. We've got to stop thinking along those lines. Look, you're going to get a whole spectrum of people. There are going to be people that don't want Mohammed coming in taking their jobs. There are going to be people that say you're going to shut down coal mines this very second. You're always going to get extremes. But because of compulsory voting in Australia, it tends to force our politics more into the centre. And this is why we're very lucky that we don't have really extreme parties. But, you know, like imagine, there's just so many things we could do if we just stopped clinging on to the brand of Liberal or Labor and voted based on what is the right thing to do, who is the right party for this. And, you know, if we could get more people to become more politically engaged, if factual information was getting out to them more in the media, then people would be better informed to make those decisions politically. But we've got to give them an alternative, because Liberal and Labor are no longer cutting it for me, and I know for a lot of people. So, you know, how about we take the best bits of both, because there are good bits of both, and we take the best bits of both and we make something up that's better.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, but I think that's probably a conversation for a whole nother video, because we both know, and we've known each other via Twitter and you know, by correspondence long enough to know that that's easier to say than to do.
I know. Yeah.
Like, you know, as you said before, people have spent time, they're committed, they've got members, there's accountability that they feel they have. They're often connected by their brand for whatever personal reasons. And then there's ego, which we can't deny exists as well. And so I would love to see the same thing. All the sort of the smaller parties to just stop, say, we know collectively we keep giving elections to these guys by not joining together. We're working by not being together. Let's down tools. Let's say to our members, we're sorry, but what we believe in is bigger than just us. It's about taking them. I'd love that. I support it any day of the week. Do I think it's practical, or do I have confidence that it's on the horizon? Less so.
I hope so.
I'd love it to happen though.
Yeah, it would be it'll look at an amazing thing to happen. And what it would mean is that more Australians are taking control back of their politics. They're taking control. Yeah, their future. Absolutely.
Politics, because I know for young people, it really, if I ask them, you know, flat out, are you interested in politics? They'll be like,
nah.
No. And I'd be like, okay, but are you interested in the decisions that shape your future? Well, yeah. It's a language thing, unfortunately. Politics.
I know. They don't understand the difference, but like, I think a lot of younger people, they're very disenchanted because they see all the bickering and the fighting in politics. And so that would put anybody off. But what people need to understand is that politics affects their life. The decisions that are made in the parliament affect their life. Yeah. And like we've just seen with all these Black Lives Matter protests, which I'm just so excited about, because, you know, this is the change, and I hope we can sustain this momentum, because I don't want it just to be a march. I want this to be a real dedicated journey into recognition for First Nations people. But, you know, get it, that all the young people that were marching all over Australia, that's politics. They were involved in politics. Right. And those issues and climate change and everything like that, that is politics, and it affects their lives directly. And what we've got to do is, because politics is full of pale, stale white males telling people what to do, what we've got to do is say, hey, let's try voting for a different type of people. Vote for Charlie, or vote for Bethany, or vote for somebody else that you think that will represent your interests, and get involved yourself, because politics is exciting. It's wonderful. Like, the reason why I'm so passionate and motivated in it, because even though I get so frustrated and angry and just want to throw things at the TV when I see certain people speaking, I'm excited because I feel like I can do something about it. Yeah. And I may never get elected, Charlie, and that's okay, because at least I'm giving it a go. I'm trying. And in the process of trying, I'm talking to people, I'm meeting people. I love it. You know, Twitter, a lot of people bag out social media. I freaking love Twitter so much, and I love all the people on there. I keep saying it is my tribe, and there's only like one or two I've ever met in person, from Twitter, but they're my people. I love them. I just love them, and they engage with me, and I get to know them. And I know, you know, I get a lot of people messaging me privately, you know, giving me advice. Oh God, I love it. You know, and I don't always get it right either on Twitter. Like, I can say some pretty shitty things, not deliberately, but sometimes I get things wrong because of my, I'm a human, and sometimes I'm a bit dumb about things. I'm learning. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Like, one of the things I'm really excited to learn more about, and I'll calm my enthusiasm down, but I love it, is that, so I grew up in a country town where there was no Indigenous people. I didn't see an Indigenous person until I was in my teens. And so I feel like I've missed out on a lot of understanding about Indigenous sensitivities and, you know, issues with First Nations people. And it's just because I've been young, dumb and ignorant. It's not because I haven't cared or anything like that. I just didn't really know. And so over the years, I'm learning more about it, and I want to know more about it, and I want to be an advocate, and I want to be a really good ally. But I've kind of been a shit ally because I think I'm doing the right thing, but I'm thinking as a white person. I'm not thinking as, you know, and what I've ended up doing in a couple of cases is taking up all the space. As a white woman, I'm using my privilege to talk about these Indigenous issues that I shouldn't be talking about. What I should be doing is raising the voices of them and not making it about me. I don't want to be a white saviour. I want to be in the background lifting First Nations voices in Australia, and that's going back. I want more First Nations voices in government, and I want to lift them, and I want to be a better ally. And what I love about Twitter is there are so many beautiful Aboriginal people on there who just gently they don't have to, and they could hand my ass to me if they wanted to, but they give me a gentle nudge quietly behind the scenes to help me be better. And I'm so bloody grateful to them for it. I really am, because it's not about me, it's about them.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, but this is a really great segue to dive deeper into this. And it starts, or at least we can identify it by starting as how difficult it is, anyone that isn't pale, male, stale, to enter a system that they designed, right? Like, so let's be under no illusions that, and I was caught up on this I made a comment about the founding fathers, and someone said, they were just wealthy landowners in America, like they weren't ideal. And I was like, actually, you're right. It's just because I've always loved Hamilton and the story of Hamilton.
Oh, okay.
Right. Like that predominantly he was an outlier in that instance. Okay. And same here in Australia, our system was really designed for white farmers. So land, you know, they're the elite. They had all the power. They created a system that worked for them, and their 2 week on, 2 week off was largely around their schedule of being on the farm and off the farm. And Canberra was a negotiation between Canberra and Sydney because they couldn't sort their shit out, and that's why it's there and not, you know, in the middle of Australia, and where it absolutely could be and could create an amazing economy and interconnectivity, you know, in the center of this country, in the heart of this country. So what leaves us is anyone that's not a white male that has come from a certain stature and certain pie, as you said, well connected and well educated, and usually a lawyer. That's the system, it's designed for those people. So anyone else outside of those people, and it's certainly from a Western Australian perspective or regional Australian or anywhere that's not on the East Coast, it is not a system engineered for us. And so the reason we don't see the same amount of representation isn't even as simple as, you know, people don't want to. There's some serious, like, so you and I, we both have kids. If you get elected, let's say, how have you reconciled what to do with your kids? I mean, you're in Canberra, so that helps. Imagine if you weren't. Like, so for me, if I was to ever run, and in 2022, my kids would be 15 and 13, really important years of their development, right? I would have to figure out how I was going to deal with being a FIFO. And I'm not taking away, there are a lot of families and a lot of mothers that do FIFO, but this isn't FIFO, because when you're back, you're not off. You're doing your local electorate stuff. So this isn't a FIFO situation. This is a full-time, more than full-time job that requires a hell of a lot of travel and away time.
But this is why we've got to change that system, because it's created for men. Right. And so to get more women into politics, there's so many reasons why women don't get into politics. And we've seen it, by the way, so many women have been treated. But by getting more women into politics, we can change how politics is structured and when they sit and how often they sit and all of that sort of thing. We can, you know, we've got to look at, investigate ways that we can make those changes and make it easier and more accessible for women, because I hear you. I've thought about that as well. So my kids are with their dad every second week. And so I have that flexibility where every second week I'm all there. The other advantage, as you said, I'm in Canberra. So when Parliament's sitting, I'm still home. I might have some late nights, but I'll arrange something. I'll get my mum to come and help me or something like that. But we've got to change how it's done. Like I don't have the answer.
No, I don't think anyone does. It's a worthwhile conversation.
It is a worthwhile conversation, absolutely, because there's a really good book, and I wish I could think of it right now, but it's basically about how policies, everything is designed by men for men. You know, just things like toilets, you know, spaces for toilets. Like if you go out to the theatre, I don't go to the theatre much, but, you know, I go to the Canberra Theatre and I see comedy shows and things like that. But, you know, there's always a line for the women's toilets. Yeah. And that's because they made the size of men's and women's toilets the same. So men can just get in there and go in and out. So they don't need as many urinals as women need toilets. But, you know, men don't think about that. So that was just one example that they've given. There's so many more, that everything's designed by men for men. And they don't think about women. You know, temperatures, how temperatures are set in offices, they're usually set a bit cooler for men.
Yeah.
And women are always cold.
I always have a jumper in my car forever, because of the amount of times I felt like I was in Antarctica in boardrooms or in executive management meetings. 100%. But then if we know that it is that the system and the way that it is to participate is so stacked against women, especially women with children, then let's think about it from an Indigenous Australian perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's that answer. Yep. Right?
Yeah,
and I don't think it is as simple as us being able to just say we need more. What we need first is a rigorous dissection and review of what is the right way to make decisions as a country.
Yeah.
And how can we ensure that the pipeline, the talent pipeline from, you know, so that regardless on age or status or background or demographic, whatever, we encourage and the right systems are in place for accessibility. And it isn't that. Now, I'm not saying we all need to move Canberra, like Parliament House in Australia or anything like that, but that would be equal from a geographical perspective, right? Yeah. And that would mean everyone in Canberra loses out.
Yeah, exactly.
It becomes less convenient for them. But everyone, that by almost exact, everyone in WA make up so much more from what we lost. And so these are the comments. And then people could say, well, WA doesn't have the same population as Eastern states. Is that not because of that though? Like, would WA not be more feasible from a population perspective? We've got room to grow population wise. If we spread it all out a little bit, in a coastal area that's really just left touched. The argument around the population is only because that's how it was. Right? You know, that's where Sydney and Melbourne settled. Canberra was the and everyone out west were crazy people that were just willing to be so isolated. But if we change that to be more equitable, what implications would that have on our population? And are we just using a symptom as an excuse? And so, but these are the conversations we're not seeing in the major two parties, right? We're not seeing that conversation. We're not saying, okay, regional Australians actually probably deserve their own portfolio. So a whole minister design just equally looking at.
Didn't we used to have that? Well, no,
we do and we don't in dribs and drabs.
There is a Department of Infrastructure has regional development in it.
There's dribs and drabs, and there's one like I think there's a regional education, and there's like little, but there's not a collective together.
Yeah,
great idea. What? We're looking through the lens of the regions and everything that impacts them. That's what we're going to look at. We need the same for women. We need the same for young
First Nations people. Absolutely, we do. And the thing is too, and with First Nations people, I do not want white people making policies for them. Like, I just hate the thought of that. It's bad enough having Tony Abbott being Minister for Women when he was the Prime Minister, but having white people or even First Nations people that are kind of effectively white making those decisions. It's got to, you know who I'm talking about. You've got to have Indigenous people who are representing their culture and their history, and it has to be. We have to get more of them in there. We've got to elevate them. Look, I sort of see a lot of similarities between, elevating women to Indigenous people, because we have the same. We're all oppressed by the patriarchy. And while we're fighting based on gender, where First Nations people are fighting based on race. And obviously women probably have a lot more privilege in society, white women, than do First Nations people. But like, this is where my learning curve, journey is continuing. Like, of course I'm outraged about the Black deaths in custody. I'm really, really outraged. But what Linda Howard, who I mentioned earlier, she wrote to me this sort of message about we're focusing on that, and we're focusing on the police, and it definitely is a problem. So let's not take away from that. But the issues that women and children are having in Indigenous communities is horrendous. The rape, the child abuse, the domestic violence. Women in Indigenous communities are so much more likely to be raped, bashed, murdered. Children are getting sexually abused, taken from their families. Like, the issues in these communities is diabolical. So that, yes, it's heinous that so many Black people have died in custody, but we've also, I think, need to focus on the bigger issue of how do we save and protect all the women and children and the men from themselves? How do we protect them? Sorry, that was really bad language. How do we help them? Empower them. Thank you for that language, and I'm sorry anyone who's watching.
Do you know,
this is where I stuff up and I use the wrong language.
The thing about this, the apologising for, it's important because it shows the humility. But I think from the outset, what we need to start expecting our leaders is to be open enough to have conversations and to fuck up. Like, if we're at each other immediately and jumping at each other, which is Twitter culture, right? Jumping at each other for one misworded, where the intention was good. Language matters, and we need to have enough space to fix it when we make those areas. And so that comes down to the journalists who might want to just double check. They know that quote's going to probably give them good headlines, but they should be offering individual now this is going to be interpreted this way. Is this what you meant? Why? Because that's responsible. It's not perhaps as good in the business of it all, but that's what's ethical, is to make sure, are you did you potentially made a mistake? And we need to be open to saying, I'm sorry, I need to rephrase that. And that happens. But, you know,
I know that's going to happen constantly with me, because I'm not, as I said, I'm not from that polished ilk that I'm not going to come across. Oh, well, I hope so. I hope people see that. And this is the thing, like, politicians shit me up the wall. They absolutely do. And I don't want to be a politician. I want to be a real person advocating for the people and it's not just my community. I want to advocate for all Australians, because I care about so many issues, and it's going to be hard for me. I know I'm going to have to focus on maybe a few, because I won't be able to stretch myself that far if I was ever lucky enough to get in. But, you know, the main thing is that I care. I really, really care, and I've got the intent, and it's genuine. And so I hope that, and this is the sort of people, not just me, these are the sort of people we need to see as our elected representatives across the board. We need to stop voting for the pale, stale white males and vote for the diversity that is representative of our community, not just women, not just First Nations people, but we need to vote for, you know, Chinese people. We need to vote for Indian people. We need to vote for African people. We need to vote for people from all over the world that live in and contribute to our society, because we are multicultural, and I love that about Australia. I love that we can, and many of us do, embrace multicultural Australia, and that's what we need to see more reflected in our parliament, and that's where we will see more ethical, effective decision making.
Because of the diversity of the group making, the decision making group, and this is a thing I explain to young people all the time. And when I say young people, people that can vote and who are under 40 is who I classify. You know, that it isn't, get rid of the language that's got such a negative connotation. I am passionate about creating better ways to make decisions as a country.
Yeah.
Right.
I love it.
And the most dysfunctional of that is in our federal parliament.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to get elected, the smartest thing for me to do, if that's what was my goal, would be to start in state parliament. I reckon, and I've been cautioned many a times to do that at a state level. And then once you build your...
Or a major party, though, I bet.
Various different parties have approached me over the years. And then, you know, make your place in WA and then use that and then become a federal... But that would assume that I cared about getting elected. That's incorrect. What I care about is addressing the federal system, and that may end up as me running, because it's very, very hard for me to suggest young people and different people should run and not run myself. It's hypocritical. However, there are lots of other ways to contribute, and I haven't quite landed on what mine might be. But what's really important is it's not about winning. For me isn't necessarily election. Winning for me is getting more younger people engaged. Winning for me is to get people, give them some hope that there's people that think like them and are fighting for them and are trying. That's a win. But to convert it into anything meaningful, it inevitably means we need to get bums on seats in parliament. And that for me at this stage is helping whomever I can elevate them enough so that more people are paying attention. Because in the downtime years between elections, this is the time we need to start having these conversations.
100%.
2022 is too late. You know, we're getting inundated with lies and nonsense. What we need to do is spend this time, this year and then next year, talking about important things, so that in 2022 we've got hopefully a better caliber of parties that have been rigor tested, and our eyes are a lot more open. We cannot continue down the same path of just abject acceptance of the bullshit that we have.
We can't.
Right,
we've got to change, and this is where voters have to change the way they vote. You know, and we've got to give them, and we need to give voters a better product to vote for. And everybody has their own way that they can save the world. So what I mean by that is that I'd love to see someone like you run, but it comes down to what you're skilled at. So in my real life, I'm just an average Josephine, you know, like I'm just me. I'm nothing exceptional. But where I found my, I don't know, voice, superpower, I don't know, whatever it is Twitter. So I have amassed a really good following, and I don't like saying followers because I do consider Twitter people to be my friends in the social media sense. But yeah, in my network. And but that's where I discovered that people want to hear the truth said. They just want to hear it from a certain perspective. So my perspective is based on justice, fairness, tolerance, love, you know, whatever. In saying that, I don't show any of those traits to right-wing people who are abusive to me on Twitter. And it's really funny because people who are really like anti-same-sex marriage or, you know, racist, they'll have a go at me for not being progressive because I don't listen to their views. And I find that really funny that they think that their view on that gay people shouldn't be allowed to be married, or I'm just so adamant that if these people, if gay people, no one's forcing a straight person to get married. So live and let live. I guess what I'm trying to say is I won't be tolerant towards people who are racist or bigoted or homophobic or misogynistic. I just won't be, because they're not equal views at the table. They don't deserve a seat at the table. They're hateful views. It's not just another opinion, it's a hateful opinion. And to me, they shouldn't be given the same airtime or oxygen as people with normal, tolerant, kind, compassionate views. It's almost like being left or being tolerant and compassionate is a bad thing to these people. And I don't understand how the focus can go from having a kind world to having promoting a world full of hate and division. I don't understand how that's been allowed to happen.
I think it's a really interesting point. So I have the view that even if they are hatred, they have freedom of speech. Because if I didn't believe that, then I didn't really.
They do.
Freedom of speech. I think the social media, we are all a social experiment on social media.
Yeah.
That experiment's been going on for quite some time now. And I think what it has shown is largely what the media was starting to do. Chaos, drama, sadness, tragedy sells. It gets clicks. We know that. Moderate, common, majority, logical things are mundane and boring, and no one wants a piece of it. And also, we have to so that's that. And we could create algorithms to change it, but the human instinct to want to click onto sensational stuff probably can't be fixed, I'd argue. So we need to figure out some sort of self-control mechanism. I don't know. We need to counter that or increase education to be able to accept that. It's the same as when we educate people, you know, especially young girls. When you're looking at a magazine, you're seeing it's photoshopped and it's not how they'll have like dietitians, and this is not normal. So when you see that, just know that. I think we probably need to develop those sort of same skill sets to ingrain in ourselves and in our children to understand that this might seem like this is the only thing on Twitter that's or in the world that's worth talking about because it's on Twitter, but actually very few people are on Twitter. It's a very specific minority that are on Twitter, and it seems a lot bigger. Unfortunately or fortunately, the political class are in the Twitter sphere, and so therefore the Twitter sphere are influential by virtue of the fact that the politicians are. I think when we speak or we know racism is in our country, we know it. Like anyone that pretends that
I'm not racist, but
I mean, it's not even shallow deep. It's like it's pretty out there. It's unfortunate. It's possibly what one might expect with the amount of immigration that we've had. But what we need is better leadership, you see, because leadership sets the bar of what is socially acceptable. So when you have Donald Trump saying shit about Mexicans being rapists or whatever the hell, that emboldens those that have those beliefs, and it emboldens them to the point of sharing it to their children that they might not have. Whereas if you as a leader set the culture of the country, I mean, it's not the only person that sets the culture of the country, but it matters. and there is no tolerance for racism, and there's an openness, then it filters down. And I think so that if anything, how important it is to get the right kind of leaders, because they set the precedence of what is socially and culturally.
They totally do. But what the misconception is with freedom of speech, as you said earlier, we don't have a Bill of Rights. We don't have freedom of speech in Australia. That's something that it's an American thing, but we do have a democracy that's supported that view of freedom of speech. But freedom of speech does not mean freedom from consequence. And this is what a lot of people who are on the right, they think that if they say something hateful and people who don't like what they say respond quite strongly to what they've said, they say we're shutting down their freedom of speech. But they are ignoring the fact that freedom of speech also means the freedom for me to retaliate to what you've said and show my immense displeasure at your hateful, bigoted view. So that's
no, you're right. It does. It's not freedom from consequence.
Exactly.
It's also really interesting, again, the social experiment that is social media. It's not possible even to sue for slander or in the same way that we might have normally when something was published, because everyone's publishing, right?
Yeah.
The existing system that we have to prevent those consequences cannot keep up, right? It cannot keep up.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, where the social media companies themselves have to figure out what is a consequence, and they are. And I think Twitter are probably doing better than the others.
Oh, I'm loving Twitter for its warnings about Donald Trump's tweets, and it's interesting that on Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg's going in the complete opposite direction towards sort of sucking up to Trump and those sorts of views, whereas Twitter is starting to be quite responsible. And I have to shout out to Twitter.
Yeah, but it's a very delicate line between censorship, right? And I don't support any horrible views of I'm very open-minded. I'm all for equality, but I know those on a certain type, let's call them Trump supporters, right? Trump supporters,
MAGAs.
Yeah, the ones that feel emboldened and entitled to their beliefs that they are the only ones that deserve equality, don't understand equality, frankly. Certainly have only ever benefited from privilege,
from their white entitlement.
Right. But when you start censorship or you're enabling censorship, it's a very slippery slope between.
But there's a fine line between censorship and warnings,
right?
So with Trump, I wouldn't say what happened with Trump as being censored. All Twitter did was say, here's some factual information, would you like some milk with your tea, that sort of thing. And same with the sort of, there's a warning that the tweet promotes glorified violence. And I think that's a really clever way to do it, because they're not saying Trump can't say it, but what they're saying is, well, we think this, I'll put words into their mouth, we think this breaches community standards, and we think that people need to know. And this is what's been so incredible, Charlie. Like, I cannot believe that the mistruths and misinformation is now the new norm, and facts are seen as the enemy. The truth is seen as the enemy. And what sort of upside down universe do we live in for the truth and for scientists to be hounded and for Donald Trump to just be able to say whatever he wants to say. And like you said, that's the culture that's coming from the top, that's trickling down, that brings all of the right-wing people out of the woodwork, thinking it's okay to be racist and it's okay to be hateful. And it's never, the hate has never made the world a better place. So I don't understand, what are these people trying to achieve? Are they deliberately trying to create a violent, divisive world? Is that the world they want for their kids, where everybody's fighting each other and it's violent and aggressive?
Well, if you're selling arms and you make profit out of selling weapons or selling stories, then you probably do. Let's be real.
That's true.
There are economics in this that are involved in the military complex that is in America. And again, America is a whole nother, frankly, I can't even imagine they can escape from this.
That's a social experiment right there.
I feel like it's a failed experiment. It's like, this is not this is how not to do democracy. And if anything, if this is
Yeah.
the most important, 2022, I feel, is the most important year that we vote in more individuals that are fighting for change so that we don't end up like America, and to a lesser extent, but still an extent, to the UK. I mean, these were they're much older democracies than ours. We have an opportunity to learn from what's gone on and think, actually, we know we can do better.
Well, what we haven't touched on is something that's it's a bit sensitive, but I think really important to people, is the separation between church and state. We haven't really touched on that because this is another rabbit hole we probably should go down another time. But talking from a high level, we're seeing the increase of not just religion, but extreme, what some may consider extreme religion into Australian politics, and with a certain religious viewpoint. And that, I find that really concerning as well, because Australia, we've always had this separation between church and state, where there's a little bit of religion in there, where they say the Lord's Prayer, etc., but and swear on a Bible, but you know, when it comes to policy,
straight away not secular, right? I mean, they chose their side. Can we be fair? Like, it's not they're not signing on the Quran.
No. But what I'm saying is, I'm really concerned about any religion having an impact on policy, on decision making in politics. So we won't go into that in detail, because that's probably a whole other conversation there. But that's something that really concerns me as well, and something that we have to protect.
Right. I think the reality is, I was brought up, so first, personal context was really important. I was brought up by my parents who were, I think my mum was baptized Church of England, which is only a religion-based thing, wanting to divorce and hated the Pope. So, I mean, that's taking this. But my mum and dad, from immigrating to Australia, really believed that raising my sister and I without any religious associations, right? So we were never baptized to anyone, but yet we went to a non-denominatory primary school, but our high school was Catholic. So that was a massive process of adjustment for me, having to make sure I was respectful, and I was always brought up to be respectful of all religions, but it doesn't mean you get to choose. If you marry someone Jewish, you're able to be Jewish, we're not going to put that on you. That's something for you to choose.
That's how it should be.
Yeah, so I had that's where I've come from, is being respectful, but also really interested in learning the foundations of religions, the purpose of them, especially in the beginning when there was a majority of people that didn't know how to read. So it was about morality and connected to culture. And I get the significance and importance of it. And a lot of my friends, in fact, my two best friends, we would have an exact same experience, and I'd be like, oh, that was the universe, and they would say that was God. Now, they're my best friends, and and we share an exact same experience, and they will interpret it entirely differently to me. But I'm down with that. Whatever they want to do is good. That makes no consequence to me.
Exactly.
But I don't believe any religious views, as you said, should ever be a determination into the decisions for this country, frankly, because we have to acknowledge that Australians are every religion. We're one religion. We're everything. And so the second that we start enabling any elected representative to make decisions for the country, not for them, they can choose to go to the country they want. But as a collective, they should not be making decisions for us, because that assumes a privilege for a certain. Well,
it's like with the Religious Freedom Bill. What they're trying to do is create a privilege for certain religions to be able to, and they're using it they're trying to say it's in the context of, you know, we can't discriminate against them, but they use it, but it's more about they're going to be able to discriminate against us. And that's, and it's things like, you know, if a single mum takes a child to a childcare centre and some people that work there are religious, they can say, well, you're a bad mother for not, you know, allowing your child access to the father, or, you know, they can discriminate based on things like that. So I have a fundamental issue with the freedom of religious bill, because I think it's not freedom of religion, it's freedom to be entitled and to discriminate against other people. But one of my favourite things and this is how far we've gone towards religion. Like back when John Howard was the Prime Minister. So I'll give up a little secret of mine. I've always loved Peter Costello.
Yeah.
I've always adored him, and I feel like he's very misunderstood. I feel like he was a really good man. I think he was a lovely man, and I think he had a lot of wit and a lot of intelligence, and I think we missed out on someone who could have been a great Prime Minister. But anyway, when Tony Abbott was the Minister for Health, there was a push to get the abortion pill AU486 into Australia. Yeah. And Tony Abbott, because he's religious, was vehemently opposed to it. And to his credit, and this is to the Liberal Party's credit, they allow a conscience vote. So people are allowed to vote based on how they feel. So in this instance, John Howard allowed it. And when Peter Costello spoke, and this is what made me just adore him even more, he basically said, look, I'm deeply religious, so I don't believe in abortion, but I respect women's right to have the choice to have an abortion. He said that his wife had a difficult pregnancy, and advice at the time was that if she didn't abort the baby, not only her life would be in danger, basically. And while they made the decision, because of their religious beliefs, they made the decision to keep the baby, and thank goodness everything was okay. The baby was healthy, happy ending. But he said, we had the choice to make that decision. And that was everything to me. And it's about having choices. So going back to having religion in Parliament, what we're seeing is a slippery slope where religion in Australia, whilst it's still, there's a lot of religious people, and there's some beautiful Christian people. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-religion per se. I'm not religious, but I fully respect and admire Christians and other denominations who are good people. But there are a lot of bloody bad Christians and a lot of bad. And there's a particular church who I think is, my personal belief is that it's just a way to make money. It's a business. And so, but when religion impacts on policy, it's wrong. It's just wrong. I should find a better, more impressive word to say, but I haven't got one. It's just wrong. And I don't want to see it. And that's something I want to fight for too, is fight for a secular Australia where you are free to be religious. You will not be persecuted for being religious, and you can hold your religious beliefs, but don't you ever push your religious beliefs on other people, in particular if you're in government. So, yeah, and that's something I will fight for.
I'm pretty sure, and again, I should know this, I'm pretty sure constitutionally it says verbatim that it is secular. So if it ever went to the High Court, you'd win.
Yeah. Well, wasn't there a fellow Williams or something who challenged the school program? What they passed a pastoral program?
Yeah, I mean, that's a decision that's made that isn't secular, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. But I'm pretty sure he challenged that and won.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I'm fairly certain it's constitutionally right. But this is the problem that we have in many aspects of our constitution. What is written by the letter of the law isn't always the way that we function. And if we were to really look at the constitution, the Governor General would have a hell of a lot more role than actually they do.
Yeah.
You have gaps between what is actually written, but then certain times it's upheld, and then other times it's a bit like, gray area.
I think it's a bit ambiguous, in a few areas. It's
how long ago? I mean, this is or I guess my obsession or passion is from a political perspective.
Yeah.
Curiosity around, can't we do it better? Like we just
well, that's something I've thought about as well. So I've always wanted to study law, and I actually signed up at ANU last year to do a graduate certificate of law. But you know what killed me? The HECS. I couldn't, the repayments killed me. So I had to drop out. I just couldn't afford to do it as a single mum. But I really wanted to do constitutional law because I'm quite fascinated by it as well. But from a logical point of view, as you said, it was written over 100 years ago. Maybe we can do better. Maybe we need to revise it. We definitely need to have recognition of First Nations people in there. That's the priority. But the rest of it, and this is where if we this is where I see a federal ICAC, maybe I know people are sick to death of them, but a royal commission. I would love to basically have a complete review and overhaul of the Australian political system, of how we do things, of the constitution, of everything, and then put it, because we do have to change, if any changes are made to it, we have to have a referendum, put it to the people and explain that to them why we're doing it. Say, this is what we want to do, and put it to the people, because it is a bit archaic and it is written by white men for white men, and we could do better. Australia can do better.
Yeah.
You know, we should be so much better than we are.
And that's what makes me very confident that we live in the best country in the world, because if I look at how civil liberties and equality have eroded in the UK, where all my family are, the opportunities to get healthcare is, I mean, they have the NHS, but it's on its knees. America, basically none. You know, we have it, and I think that's part of our biggest problem is that apathy, right? We have it pretty good. Starting to get to that point where we're at risk of losing all of the foundations that makes this country the lucky country.
We are, Charlie. And like two things, a couple of things Australians should be really proud of. Number one is Medicare. We've got the best. We are so lucky to have the health system that we have. We are so lucky that a mother who has cancer has to choose between paying for a treatment to live or supporting her family. So, you know, we're so lucky, like in America, we don't have to make those decisions like they do. And we've got to protect that at all costs. And the other thing that I'm so grateful for is the ABC, Australian Broadcasting Commission, because we get we get amazing news programming, we get Australian content, we get, I think it's unbiased. I know a lot of people disagree, but we get amazing news, and I feel so much trust and confidence in the news I receive from the ABC, that it's authentic and it's factual. And the government, this government is doing everything it can to erode the ABC. It's doing what it can to erode Medicare. And it's, again, going back to the boiling frog analogy, it's doing it by stealth. It's chipping away at the ABC's budget. It's chipping away at Medicare. And all of a sudden, we're going to end up with two products that the government, if it keeps happening, the government's saying, look, it's hopeless. It's not doing its job. It can't run. Let's privatise it. Yeah. And this is what's really, really dangerous. And this is where we do need a new government, because a new political party in Australia that fights for these institutions, because I know that Australians are very apathetic. I know that if we lost Medicare, there would be people marching on the streets. Like, we just can't afford to lose it.
But why happen slowly? And that's exactly your point.
Exactly.
They'll make it so dysfunctional that you couldn't argue for it, and you're having to reclaim these rights. And this is where we're going. I mean, I'm 33, so I was born 87. Yeah. And I feel like the 90s seemed a lot more hopeful.
Yes, they did.
The era I'm bringing my kids up in. And that says a lot of our leadership in the last 40 years is we're not going forward. It doesn't feel like we're going forward. It feels
we are going backwards. We are going backwards, and we're losing things that we've always taken for granted in Australia. We're losing. Like, we're losing. I'm concerned about the power of Peter Dutton with Home Affairs, because you know, again, going back to those police raids of ABC officers and Annika Smethurst, that to me, that terrifies me. And the legislation that the government just keeps sneakily implementing, and Labor are just quietly going along with it. So they're complicit. And this is why, like, as you know, I'm very against one party and moderately against the other, purely because they're complicit with a lot of the stuff that goes on and the legislation that's being passed, because it's not transparent. And we're losing our rights. And so one day we are going to get to a point where we have no rights. And and by that stage, it's going to be too late. And where, you know, there's people like you and me, and all the other people that can see it and say, well, we've got to do something about it now. And a lot of Australia is complacent about it. And they go, nah, she'll be right. Don't worry about it. It's fine, because it's always been okay. And the Liberal Party, the LNP send the message through the Murdoch media that the Liberal Party are doing a great job. Everything's okay. Don't you worry about it. They'll take care of business. And they're not. They're taking our rights away. They're actually hurting regional Australia more than they're helping regional Australia. They're not helping women. They're not, you know, like oh my God, the women that have been murdered by partners every year in Australia, and funding is stripped from programs that help women that are experiencing domestic violence. You know, the NDIS is a dog's breakfast because the government's just stripping money from it. So there's all these things that I just get so frustrated, Charlie. Like I almost like lose my words, which is almost impossible with me. But I get so frustrated that we're letting this happen, and we've got to stand up and do something
on our behalf. Who's you know, we see Helen Haynes and Zali Steggall, Andrew Wilkie. I think, if I'm really honest, Andrew Wilkie seems, because I've seen what he's done to advocate on behalf of Julian Assange. I've seen what he actually tried to bring in, I think, the Bill of Rights recently. I see a lot more of Andrew Wilkie's stuff, so I can't really comment on Zali and Helen.
Well, Zali's voted with, I know with the decision to move Parliament until August, which I think is terrible. She voted with the Liberal Party, and I think she does vote with the Liberal Party a bit. I'll have to, just from what I've heard, but I'd have to look into that. But look, we've just got to have more transparency in government across the board, and we've got to have more people who are passionate about making change get in. And it doesn't matter what walk of life you're from. I want to get people who are from the sporting community, who are from the arts community, who are from the First Nations people. I want people from all around the community. People who are trusted, like people in social media, social commentators. I want them to get involved. You know, I see people on TV, and Barry Cassidy, sorry, not Barry Jones, he's Labor. Barry Cassidy, he's someone I would love to see get into government, even if in an advisory role, because people like that, they've got so much knowledge about politics and the political machinations and how everything works. Imagine the good that people like Barry could do if he was involved in some way. You know, we need to get the best people in Australia, not politicians. Get the best people in Australia together, the best brains. Work out a structure that gives everybody a say that's fair and democratic. And have these people, have experts in the areas, have scientists making decisions on climate change policy, and how we have First Nations people managing our environment, managing burn-offs and managing the land. Imagine if we had that. Like, it would be incredible if we had experts in their fields looking after things. I think that political advisors should be experts and not political apparatchiks there just to say whatever their respective ministers want to hear, because it's all become so political now. They're not getting the experts. We need to have, like, senior public servants return to giving that frank and fearless advice, you know, instead of being so scared to say anything. Now, my friends are too scared to help me campaign because they're scared of losing their jobs. Now, the APSC code says that you can be involved in political parties, you can do that. You can't be at work sprouting off and doing it at work, but you're allowed to be. But the government's put so much fear into the public servants in Canberra that they're terrified of even being seen involved. They don't want to comment on social media. They don't want to do anything. So they're not engaging politically because they're terrified of losing their jobs. Yeah. And I think that's so wrong. You know, we've got to stop this culture of fear and distrust, and we've got to make people respect politics. Politicians are not respected. I think they're down with used car salesmen. They're not respected at all, and people don't trust them. And that, because I love the institution of politics and the machinery of government, that really saddens me that people don't respect politicians. And I would like it to be something that I want to be at I want it to be something I'm proud of. If I get involved, I want to be proud of myself. I want to make people trust. I want to make people trust me. I want people to trust me because they're confident that I've got their interests at heart and I'm going to do the right thing by them. I don't want them to think that I'm just in there for myself to make money and get ahead. Unfortunately, the way to get into politics is you've got to promote yourself.
Yeah.
Because if people don't know who you are, they're less likely to vote for you. And so for me, I'm not really that big on all the attention stuff and making it all about me. But if I don't ring my own bell, people won't know who I am and won't vote for me. So you've got to sort of walk that fine line. And
you got to sell yourself, because you've got to sell what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
And it's not so much it's you are the vehicle for those ideals.
Yeah.
And that's easier to sell. Like that's certainly what I've tried to like think through. Like if it was me, I've always struggled with selling myself, but that's an ego thing. I'm not selling myself. I'm selling the ability or my offer to be a vehicle for a certain set of values. And that doesn't mean sometimes the things that you want to vote for, you can't, because you have to compromise, because that's politics. And people need to get a bit more comfortable with that, because it's that you can pass everything. Unless you have a majority government, that's not going to happen.
It's all about compromise. And this is where a lot of people will say, well, if you get elected, are you going to vote with blah or blah on things, or are you going to trade? And, you know, I'm not having been in government, I haven't experienced it, but I know that happens. And I know Jackie Lambie agonised over making this deal. It was something to do with, I can't even remember, but she agonised over it. And what really made me cross was the Liberal Party basically swore her to secrecy, national security. She's not allowed to say what the deal was, which I don't believe for a second. I think they hoodwinked her and made her convinced her to stay silent on it. Mm-hmm. But she was devastated that she did what she believed was the right thing to do. And I believe her. I honestly believe that she believed she was doing the right thing, and good on her for that. She stood up for something, but she got just massacred by people accusing her of selling out and that sort of thing. And I find that really disappointing, because I know that Jackie Lambie, I think she's fantastic, to be honest. I don't agree with all her views, and I don't always agree with the way she comes across sometimes with her views. But damn, I respect her, because she believes in what she's doing, and she believes in doing what she believes is right. Yeah. And they're the sort of people we leave in government. Now, someone like Pauline Hanson, I think she talks the talk about these views, but I just think she's a racist. And I just think that she's in there she's there for herself. And her and James Ashby have teamed up, and they're diabolical. And I stand by what I say. I think that she's not doing anybody any favours. Most people who support her think she's there for the average Australian, but she's there to make money, and she really doesn't contribute much to Australian politics at all, then add a level of racism and bigotry that we just don't need in Australian politics. And, so if she were to really... I just don't know what she's done for her community, other than just say outrageous things and do outrageous things. I don't, believe in that type of politics. I think, but the more authentic people we can get in, the better.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is you could argue, because the two majors are so sterile, right? They don't cut through the crap. They are just, they're boring, they're disengaging, they just all sound like complete tossers, if I'm honest. I mean, not all, but there are exceptions. But for the mass of people, they just flick the channel because they're annoying and they're not engaging and they're not inspiring. They don't have charisma, all of those things. Sadly, people like, I think to a degree, Clive Palmer and Pauline Hanson share the similarity that they actually talk candid. Now they talk, Pauline Hanson, she talks disgustingly, but she will mix up her really racist views with some occasional common sense. People like, and this confuses and compounds the matter, because I think Australian people are just so desperate for authenticity, for just what it is.
Someone to speak for them.
Right, but they add that with their craziness, and for Clive it's adding that with his self-interest in mining, and this confuses a lot of people because the reality is they don't have any other alternative. Like, who else is standing up and gaining that attention? They gain more attention because they're crazy.
I know, but imagine if we could, all over Australia, get amazing people with values that are empowering and inspiring and motivating for the people, all like in communities all over Australia, but have them tied by a common thread. And that is some sort of branding or party, if you like, but they all get to speak out for their communities. But the people who vote for them know that if they vote for that party, they're getting a party that they're getting a person that will advocate for climate change, will advocate for regional areas, will advocate for a federal ICAC. You know, they're getting those values, but they're getting someone from their community who's going to speak for their community and stand up for them, instead of putting their party as number one and their community second. Right. And that's the sort of democratic system, the political party system we need, is where everybody goes, yep, that person, they're speaking for me and I want to vote for them because they're the best person to vote for. That's what we need. And that's what I'd love to be a part of in 2022 if I can.
And so just before we close out, what is your electorate? Are you running in the lower or the Senate?
So I can't say I'm running yet because we have a pre-selection process that we've written into our constitution that for future, but we have to comply with it now ourselves, even though there's about 5 or 6 of us that have nominated to be candidates. So if I run, if I'm selected, which hopefully I will be, I'd like to run in what's called the Murrumbidgee electorate, which is Woden, Western Creek, Duffy, sort of central south part of Canberra. So it's a great electorate, and you know, it's got a lot of work, you know, hard workers, a lot of, you know, they're not they're just normal people like you and me. Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. They're good people. So I'm looking forward to it. Look, yeah. Oh, well, there's only one house in Canberra. There's no, we've got a legislative assembly, and there's 5 electorates, and there's 5 seats in each electorate. And we've got the Hare-Clark system, which please don't ask me to explain, but it's different. It's a different electoral voting system to to other areas in Australia, and so things that Canberrans care about. We've got a Labor government. We've had one forever and ever and ever and ever. And look, I think on the majority, I think they've done a pretty good job. But the problem is with they've been in for so long, they're stale. They're probably a little bit arrogant. I don't think they're as transparent as they could be. I think there's not a lot of community consultation. This is a complaint from the community in decision making that affects community members. So what the Canberra Progressives want to do is, we don't want to go in and be in opposition. We want to go in and be the eyes and ears of the community and government. So we want to go in and just using our values, just watch, monitor, have a say, hopefully, advocate for things we care about. But the Labor government are great on their, socially, they're really, really progressive, but they're not, as I said, they're not that transparent politically. So the Canberra Liberals, I won't say too much about. So, but as I said, we don't want to be in opposition. We just want to be there. Okay. Yeah. So, and to be honest, whichever side was in government, we work with either side on as long as it aligns with our values. Mm-hmm. But we would never vote for something that didn't align with our values. So that's what people would be getting if they voted for us.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure I'll add a link to not only your Twitter page, but also to the Australian Progressives website.
And the Canberra Progressives.
Yeah. I think I will speak with him more directly about the party, the constitution, who they are, and do that nitty gritty with him, as I am with a lot of the other sort of heads of the mine and
Thank you.
But it's been amazing to speak to you. I'm sure that there's a million other topics that we'd speak.
Oh, so many. I'd love to do that over wine.
But yeah, no, really appreciate your time, especially because it was so last minute. And yeah, look forward to following you in the next few years as we approach 2022.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat.
Thanks, Bethany. Ciao.
Thanks, Carly. See ya.